The New York Rangers joined the NHL as an expansion franchise in 1926 and were the first American team to win the Stanley Cup in the NHL era. The Rangers were originally admitted to the league to be a rival for the New York Americans, who started in Madison Square Garden the previous year. The Americans had such a great start that Tex Rickard, who owned the newly built third version of Madison Square Garden, was granted a franchise for a new team. Rickard was born in Missouri, but spent most of his childhood and early adulthood in Texas, and adopted the nickname Tex. Although his original idea was to name the team the New York Giants, either the local media or Rickard himself, or both, fell into favor with the idea of naming the team Texas Rangers. To build his new team in 1926, Rickard lured NHL legend Conn Smythe to scout players from all over North America and assemble the best he could find. For almost all of the team's history, the Rangers have worn blue jerseys with the word Rangers appearing diagonally. The team is also widely known for its distinctive crest, as well as other second and third designs over the years. They are perennially known as the Blue Shirts. The team got off to a great start, placing high in the standings in its first year of operation and winning the Stanley Cup the following year. One of the members of that first Cup-winning team was Lester Patrick, considered widely to be one of the fathers of American professional hockey. Born in Drummondville, Quebec, Patrick had a distinguished hockey career in Canada before joining the Rangers as a coach and general manager in 1926. During the Stanley Cup playoffs in 1928, regular Rangers goalie Lawrence Chabot took a puck to the eye and was unable to finish the game. Back in those days, teams did not dress backup goalies, so Patrick decided to put himself in net for the remainder of the game. The Rangers defeated the Montreal Maroons in overtime and went on to win their first Stanley Cup after 2 more wins in that series. At 44, Lester Patrick became the oldest goalie to play in the Stanley Cup Finals, and that is a record that still stands today. In the 1932-33 season, with Lester Patrick still coaching, the Rangers won their second Stanley Cup after knocking off the Toronto Maple Leafs in 4 games. In 1939-1940, the Rangers finished the regular season in second place behind Boston and defeated the Bruins in the first round to get a bye into the finals. Once again, the Rangers' opponent was eventually the Toronto Maple Leafs. The Rangers had home ice advantage and won the first 2 games at Madison Square Garden. The Leafs came back and won their first 2 games at home in Toronto, tying the series 2-2. Then the Rangers won the next 2 games to collect their third Stanley Cup in 6 games. The Rangers' popularity was so high in Manhattan at that time that the New York Americans shipped off to Brooklyn and then folded shortly thereafter. After the Cup win in 1940, though, the Rangers went on to one of the longest Stanley Cup droughts in NHL history. Some considered it the result of a curse caused by the management of Madison Square Garden using the bowl of the Stanley Cup to burn the mortgage documents once the arena was paid off. The curse worked in strange ways. For instance, in 1950, the Rangers made it all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals against the Detroit Red Wings. Trouble was, the management of the Garden had rented out the arena to a circus that spring, and the Rangers had nowhere to play their home games. The Rangers had to use Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto as their home arena for that series, and Detroit eventually won. The Rangers' history is closely associated with the history of New York City's premier sports properties. The Rangers played for over 40 years in the third version of Madison Square Garden between 1926 and 1968. The first 2 Madison Square Garden buildings did not feature hockey. The original was opened on the corner of 26th Street and 8th Avenue by your post-to-post host, Neil's 7th cousin 3 times removed, William Vanderbilt, in 1879. It was located near Madison Square and Madison Square Park. It had no roof and featured events like boxing, cycling, and circuses. In 1890, that first version of MSG was torn down and replaced on the same location by a new building, which did have a roof and for a time was one of New York City's largest indoor spaces. Football, marathon running, circuses, and more exhibitions were staged at MSG2, but no professional hockey was played there. The building's mortgage was held by the New York Life Insurance Company, and in the early 1920s, the sports tenants were evicted, and MSG2 was torn down to make way for the company's new headquarters, which opened in 1928 and is still the headquarters today, almost 90 years later. The third version of Madison Square Garden was built on 8th Avenue and 50th Street in the 1920s, many blocks from the real Madison Square, but keeping the name anyway. It opened to the New York Americans first in 1925, and then, as we now know, welcomed the Rangers the following year. After a long run at MSG3, the Rangers went into the fourth version of the sports complex, built several blocks south on the site of Penn Station between 7th and 8th Avenues and 31st and 33rd Streets. After demolition, the location of MSG3 was used for the building of One Worldwide Plaza. The Rangers opened their new arena in 1968 and have played there ever since. MSG version 4 is the longest-serving NHL arena in use today and will celebrate its 50th anniversary during the upcoming 2017-2018 season. MSG enjoys tax-free status in New York, but one stipulation is that the NHL's Rangers and NBA's Knicks must continue to play there. The New York Rangers share the Garden with those Knicks, as well as boxing, music and comedy acts, trade shows, and many other users. The Rangers are owned by the Madison Square Garden Company. In 1994, after a long drought, perhaps brought about by that curse, the Rangers finally won their fourth Stanley Cup. The Rangers won the President's Trophy that year with 112 points. After sweeping the Islanders in 4 games in the first round and beating Washington in 5 games in the second round, the Rangers faced the New Jersey Devils. Staring at elimination, down 3-2 in that series, Rangers captain Mark Messier made his now famous guarantee that the Rangers would win Game 6. After falling behind 2-0 in that game, the Rangers staged a comeback, with Messier scoring a natural hat-trick to make good on his promise and force Game 7. In that deciding game, the Rangers could almost taste victory when the Devils' Valerie Zelepukin scored with less than 8 seconds remaining to force overtime. In the second overtime period, Stéphane Matteau finally scored to win the series over the Devils. The Vancouver Canucks took the Rangers to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final Series that year, but the Blue Shirts finally broke their curse of 1940, winning their first championship in 54 years. Mark Messier scored the game-winning goal in the second period of Game 7. Since that victory, the Rangers have played well enough to be a factor in the playoffs most seasons, but are still searching for their 5th cup. The Rangers were finalists in 2014, but fell in 5 games to the Los Angeles Kings. In the modern age, the Rangers have iced some of the best players in hockey, including Wayne Gretzky, Mike Gartner, Jean Rattel, Brad Park, Vic Hadfield, Andy Bathgate, Rod Gilbert, Mark Messier, and Brian Leetch. Many Rangers players and executives are members of the Hockey Hall of Fame, including all of the names just mentioned, as well as Lester Patrick, Lynn Patrick, Brian Hextall, Terry Sawchuk, and Glenn Sather. The New York Rangers are the NHL's highest valued franchise, according to Forbes magazine. As they start their 91st year as members of the NHL, the Rangers are on the hunt for their 5th Stanley Cup in franchise history.